Nobody in that gym expected a 10-year-old girl to change anything that Saturday. Not the men rolling out stretching mats in the corner. Not the women taping their wrists near the water fountain. Not the three sparring partners running drills along the far wall, moving in the comfortable rhythm of people who had done this 1,000 times before and expected to do it 1,000 times more. The air inside Crossroads Dojo smelled like rubber and sweat and old wood, the kind of smell that soaks into the walls over years and never fully leaves. It was 8 in the morning. The winter light came through the high windows in flat gray sheets casting no shadows worth mentioning. 43 people were inside that gym when the doors opened and a woman walked in holding the hand of a small girl. Not one of those 43 people saw what was coming, including the man who started it. She stood at the edge of the entrance mat, the girl wearing sweatpants 2 sizes too large, the waistband folded over twice to keep them from sliding off her hips. Her jacket was clean but thin. Her sneakers were the kind that come in the value bin white ones, now the color of old dishwater. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that someone had done in a hurry, a few strands already loose around her ears. Her eyes moved fast across the room, taking everything in, filing it away. She gripped her mother's hand and did not let go. Her name was Ren. She was 10 years old, and she had not come here to prove anything. She had come here because she had run out of other options. 6 weeks earlier, Ren had walked home from school alone, the same 4 blocks she always walked past the laundromat and the corner store, and the vacant lot where someone had planted a small garden that nobody tended anymore. It was a Tuesday. It was getting dark earlier now. She had her backpack on and her eyes on the pavement, and she was thinking about nothing in particular when 2 kids from the grade above her stepped out from the alley beside the old print shop. She did not run. She had learned early that running made it worse. She stood there, and she took it, the shoves, the names, the laughter, and when it was over, she walked the rest of the way home and let herself into the apartment with the key she wore on a lanyard around her neck, and she set her backpack down by the door, and she sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet under the sink, and she stayed there until the light outside the window went fully dark. She did not cry. She had not cried about this in a long time. What she did instead was get up, heat a can of soup on the stove, and after she ate, she moved the coffee table in the living room so there was a clear space in front of the couch. She propped her mother's old phone against a stack of books on the shelf. The screen was cracked from corner to corner, a spiderweb of breaks that made the image look like it was being viewed through a shattered window, and she pressed play on a video she had already watched 11 times, and she began to move. This is the part nobody knew about. Not her teachers. Not the school counselor who had spoken to her mother twice in October and offered a pamphlet. Not the kids in her class who had long ago sorted her into the category of people who could be ignored without consequence. Not even her mother, not entirely, though Lorraine suspected more than she let on, the way mothers always do, picking up information through channels that have no name and cannot be explained. Ren had been doing this for 4 months. Every night after dinner, after homework, after the apartment went quiet, and the sounds from the street outside settled into the background hum of a city that never fully sleeps. She moved the coffee table and she practiced. She had no bag, she had no pads, she had the cushions from the couch arranged against the leg of the end table, and she had the cracked phone, and she had whatever light the floor lamp gave her. She taught herself from videos, not casually the way a kid watches something for 10 minutes and moves on. Systematically. She would watch a sequence until she understood it, then she would pause the video and try to replicate the movement, then she would watch it again and look for what she had done wrong, and then she would try again. She kept a small notebook on the shelf beside the phone where she wrote things down in her careful, precise handwriting. Notes to herself, reminders, questions she couldn't answer yet. She treated it like school, like there would be a test. In a way, she already knew there would be. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on the south side, 6 blocks from the school, and 4 blocks from the bus stop where Lorraine caught the number 19 at 6:15 every weekday evening to get to Northwestern Memorial for her shift. The building was old, the radiator clanked in winters. Hallway light on the 2nd floor had been out since September. Elevator was theoretical, but it was theirs, and Lorraine kept it clean with a thoroughness that was almost military. Every surface wiped, every corner addressed. A home maintained with the particular discipline of a woman who understood that dignity is sometimes the only thing you have full control over. In Chicago in 2019, a 3-room apartment on the south side ran about $1,100 a month. Those of you who know that neighborhood, who know what it looked like before the developers started circling, who know what working families in that zip code were carrying on their backs, You already understand what $1,100 a month meant against a hospital worker's wages. You don't need the math spelled out. You've lived that math. You know what it looks like on a face. Lorraine was 33 years old and she looked every year of it in the way that certain people do not, because life had been unkind, but because she had never once flinched from it. She had cheekbones that photographs liked and eyes that assessed everything quickly, and a stillness about her that people sometimes mistook for coldness, and that was not coldness at all. It was precision. It was the habit of a woman who had learned early that there was rarely enough time money margin, and that waste of any kind was a luxury she could not afford. She worked nights, Wednesday through Sunday, 7 to 7. Ren was in school during the day and asleep theoretically by the time Lorraine got home at 7:30 in the morning. On Monday and Tuesday, they had real time together, dinner television, the particular conversation of a mother and daughter who were in most of the important ways each other's entire world. Lorraine knew about the bullying. The counselor had called. She had come in on a Thursday, sat in the little office with the motivational posters and the box of tissues on the desk. And she had listened to a woman 10 years younger than her explain the situation in careful, qualified language that said everything and committed to nothing. Lorraine had asked what the school was going to do. The woman had talked about processes and timelines and the complexity of social dynamics among pre-adolescents. Lorraine had thanked her and driven home and sat in the car in the parking lot of the building for 11 minutes before going upstairs. She brought Ren to the gym because she did not know what else to do. That is not weakness. Don't mistake it for that. It is the specific courage of a parent who has exhausted every familiar option and is still moving forward. She had asked around. A woman she worked with, Denise from the surgical floor, had mentioned Crossroads, said her nephew had trained there, said the coach was old school serious, knew what he was doing, said it might be good for a kid who needed something to hold on to. So on a Saturday in January, Lorraine got Ren up at 7, helped her find the least worn of her sweatpants, and drove them both across town. In the car, Ren looked out the window the entire way. She did not ask questions. She did not seem nervous exactly, or rather she had the look of someone who had already processed the nervousness privately on their own time and was now simply waiting to see what came next. Lorraine kept both hands on the wheel. "You don't have to do anything today," she said. "We're just going to look." Ren nodded, still watching the street. "I mean it. We can just watch." "I know, Mom." That was all. 2 words. The way Ren said them, not dismissive, not impatient, just settled like she had already decided something that she wasn't going to discuss, made Lorraine's chest tighten in a way she couldn't name. She had noticed the notebook on the shelf 3 weeks ago, had picked it up while Ren was at school and flipped through it, careful not to disturb the page it was open to. The writing was small and neat, technical terms she half recognized. Diagrams drawn in pencil stick figures in stances with arrows indicating movement. She had stood there in the quiet apartment for a long moment, holding the notebook, and then she had put it back exactly as she found it, and she had not mentioned it. She thought about it now driving. She thought about it a lot. Crossroads, Dojo occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse on a commercial block that had been slowly changing for years, the old businesses hanging on next to new ones, a tire shop beside a juice bar, a check cashing place beside a boutique that sold candles for $22 each. The dojo's sign was simple black letters on a white background, no logo, no slogan. The front windows were painted halfway up with the kind of flat black paint that says we are serious about what happens in here, and we don't need you to see we've did from the street to prove it. Inside, it was larger than it looked from outside. The main floor was open mat space, pale blue crash pads running the perimeter. Heavy bags hung along the left wall, 7 of them worn smooth at impact height. The ceiling was high exposed beams, and on the far wall, someone had painted a single line in black letters, 3 feet tall. "The work doesn't lie." That had been there since 1993. The paint was faded now, but still legible. Still true. His name was Raymond Briggs, but nobody had called him Raymond in 30 years. He was Coach Briggs, or just Coach, and he was 58 years old. And he had the kind of face that a particular type of man develops over a particular type of life. Not handsome exactly, not severe exactly, but deeply specific. Every line on it had been earned. His nose had been broken twice, set once, and the second break had never been fully corrected, giving his profile a slight angle that he had long since stopped thinking about. His hands were outsized, scarred at the knuckles, and he moved them deliberately like a man who had learned to be careful with things that could cause damage. He had boxed professionally through the 1980s middleweight on the regional circuit, mostly Indiana, Wisconsin, Ohio, the occasional card in St. Louis. He had been good, not great good, which in professional boxing is often enough to sustain a career and not quite enough to change your life. He had compiled a record that was honest and told no lies about who he was. He had fought men who were faster than him, and men who were stronger than him, and men who were hungrier than him, and he had learned things from all of them. He had retired in 1991 with a torn rotator cuff that 3 different surgeons had told him would never be right again, and they had been correct. He opened Crossroads 2 years later with money he had saved and a philosophy he had been working out for years in the back of his mind. The philosophy was simple enough to say, and took a lifetime to actually practice: show me how you move, and I'll tell you who you are. He had been watching people walk through his door for 26 years on that principle, and he had almost never been wrong. He was standing near the far wall when Lorraine and Ren came in talking to one of the senior students about a timing issue in a drill sequence. He glanced toward the door, the way he glanced at every door, a single total assessment that took about 2 seconds and missed almost nothing. He saw the woman first, carrying something invisible but heavy the way parents carry things, holding the hand of a girl in oversized sweats who was looking at the room the way you look at something you have been preparing for without knowing it. Briggs watched the girl for 3 seconds longer than he watched the mother. Then he went back to his conversation. Later, one of his students would ask him what he had seen in those 3 seconds, and Briggs would think about it for a moment and then say her feet. She was standing with her weight distributed correctly. Not the way a person stands who has been formally taught to stand that way. The way a person stands who has figured out through trial and error and something in their own biology what position puts them in the best relationship with gravity. It was subtle. Most people in the room would not have noticed it at all. Briggs noticed it. He had seen that happen in a boy once before. 17 years ago, a Tuesday afternoon. The memory was precise in the way that certain memories are precise not because you have maintained them carefully, but because they were significant at the moment of their making, and the mind simply held them. A mother, a boy, the same weight in the feet, the same quality of eyes. He kept that thought where it was and went back to his conversation. Garrett Howell was 28 years old and he was genuinely very good. This is important to establish clearly because what happens next is easy to misread as a story about a bad person being humbled. And that is not quite what it is. Garrett had worked. He had put in years of real unglamorous effort, early mornings, late nights, the particular grind of building a body of skill through repetition so complete that the movements became unconscious, became reflex, became as natural as breathing. He had been doing this since he was 11 years old, seriously, from the beginning, the way certain people take to things and never fully put them down. He had been at Crossroads in one form or another for most of his life. The 6 years of his current run were simply the most recent chapter of something that went much further back. He was 6 feet and changed broad through the shoulders with the kind of controlled fluidity that only comes from time. When he moved across the mat, his footwork was precise and economical. He didn't waste anything. He had the black belt around his waist, and he had earned it, every bit of it, and if sometimes he wore it with a weight of expectation that had started to feel more like entitlement than accomplishment, that was perhaps the most predictable thing in the world. Excellence, when it goes uncontested long enough, begins to assume that it is simply the natural order. He knew everyone in the room. He knew their strengths and their habits and exactly how to measure himself against all of them. He was preparing for the regional tournament in March, and the open sparring sessions had started to bore him a little. There was nobody here who could truly test him, and he was aware of that in the way that a sharp knife is aware of a cutting board. He was working through a combination with Tyler, one of the intermediate students, when the door opened. He saw the woman and the girl, and he turned back to his drill. 30 seconds later, he looked over again. The girl was still standing at the edge of the mat. Her mother was talking quietly to the front desk student, asking something about the open session. The girl wasn't paying attention to that conversation. She was watching the sparring pairs moving across the mat with an expression that Garrett couldn't quite read from where he stood. He said something to Tyler and crossed toward the water station, which happened to take him within a few feet of where the girl was standing. He was not planning anything. That's the truth of it. He was thirsty, and the water was in that direction, and the girl was simply there. What happened next came from the part of a person's character that operates without advance notice, the part that has been shaped by years of being centered in every room, of always being the one that other people oriented themselves around. It was not cruelty. It was something more unconscious than cruelty, and in some ways more honest, and in almost every way more difficult to correct. He stopped. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. "Well," he said. He had a good voice, easy and confident, the kind of voice that rooms paid attention to. Did somebody bring their little sister for moral support? A few of the nearby students laughed, not unkindly, more the automatic social response to the easy joke from the person at the top of the hierarchy. The laughter spread out from them like a ripple. The girl looked at him. Her expression did not change. He crouched down, bringing himself closer to her level, and the gesture was meant to be charming, the kind of thing adults do with children to signal friendly condescension. "Tell you what," he said, "you want to try a round? I'll take it easy on you." More laughter, easy light, the sound of people who expected this to be a harmless 30-second entertainment. Lorraine had turned around. She was already moving, already formulating the polite decline, already calculating how to exit this moment without making it worse, the algebra of a mother whose child is being looked at wrong. The girl took a small step forward, just one step, but deliberate, measured. She looked at Garrett and she nodded once. The laughter stopped faster than it had started. Lorraine froze. Garrett stood back up. He looked at the girl for a moment, not quite surprised because he hadn't taken the moment seriously enough to have clear expectations, but something adjacent to it. He shrugged and turned toward the mat. "All right," he said, "let's see what you've got." And here is where Coach Briggs did something that nobody in the room expected. He watched Garrett lead the girl onto the mat. He watched the other students shift and reorient themselves to face this new event. He watched Lorraine stand very still near the edge of the room with her handbag held in both hands in front of her. And then he walked to his usual position along the near wall, and he stayed there. He did not step in. He did not redirect. He did not announce anything or change anything about how this was proceeding. He simply moved to a spot on the wall, and he crossed his arms, and he looked at the mat. One of his senior students caught his eye and raised an eyebrow in a question. He gave a small, single shake of his head. "Not now, let it go." She turned back toward the mat, uncertain. What Briggs had seen in the moment when the girl stepped forward was this: her weight transferred correctly. Not the way someone who has been told to transfer their weight correctly transfers it, in the organic way. The feet adjusted automatically without thought, the left sliding back an inch into a natural fighting stance before the girl had consciously done anything at all. It was the movement of a body that had been drilling the same motion for long enough that it had stopped being a drill and become an instinct. He had seen that happen in a boy once before. 17 years ago. He would wait now. They squared off on the mat, and the gym rearranged itself to watch, not loudly, not with the energy of spectacle, but the quiet repositioning of people who have realized that the thing in front of them is more interesting than the thing they were doing. The heavy bags stilled. The conversations dropped. Someone turned down the music until it was barely audible. Garrett settled into his stance. He was still smiling, the comfortable, practiced smile of a man who knows how this goes. He glanced around at the watching faces, and the smile said, "This will be quick and painless, and we'll all have a good story." Ren looked at him, just looked. Her feet were shoulder-width apart. Her knees were slightly bent. Her hands were up, but not rigid, the fingers loose, the elbows tucked in a way that was textbook correct, and that she had arrived at not through textbooks, but through 4 months of watching, failing, adjusting, and watching again. She breathed through her nose. Her eyes were steady. Coach Briggs from the wall looked at her feet. He nodded once, very slightly. Nobody saw it. Garrett moved forward in the lazy, controlled way of a man who is managing the situation rather than competing in it. He reached out with a light, testing push, the kind of move you use to gauge reaction speed and establish distance. Simple. Informational. Ren stepped offline. Not back, not to the side, in the instinctive, sideways shuffle of an untrained person trying to avoid contact. Offline, the correct diagonal, taking her out of the direct line of force while keeping her facing her opponent, the footwork precise enough to be almost invisible in its efficiency. Garrett's hand found nothing. He recovered smoothly, but there was a pause in there, a small recalibration. He hadn't expected that. He moved again, this time a slow, controlled front push kick, telegraphed enough that a trained eye would see it coming with a half-second of lead time. He was still testing. Ren shifted her weight back, let the kick pass, and in the same motion, one fluid sequence, she stepped forward and hit him in the chest with a front kick of her own. It was not powerful. Ren was 10 years old and 60-some pounds, and there was no physics in the world that was going to make her hit a grown man hard enough to move him. That was not what happened here. What happened was the placement, the timing, the fact that she had found the pocket, the precise window in Garrett's stance, when his weight was misaligned and his return was not yet set, and she had put a clean, correct technique exactly where it needed to go. The sound was nothing much, a dull thump against his chest protector, small and unremarkable by itself. The room heard it like a thunderclap. The murmur that ran through the watching students was involuntary, the collective intake of breath that a crowd makes when something has happened that it didn't expect. Heads turned toward each other and back toward the mat. Garrett stopped. He stood there for a moment and looked at the girl in front of him. She had already reset, feet back in position, weight balanced, eyes on him, breathing steady. His expression was doing something complicated. The easy smile was still there in its architecture, but the certainty behind it had gone uncertain. He looked at her and he was trying to understand something fitting, pieces together pulling at a memory that was almost within reach. He almost had it. He didn't have it yet. Beginner's luck, he said. His voice was still easy, still controlled. He said it the way you say something when you are saying it partly for the room and partly for yourself. He moved again. This time the pace picked up slightly, still controlled but less lazy. He tried a low sweep, the kind of movement designed to disturb the base before it becomes a takedown. Ren stepped over it. The motion was exactly right. Hook the lead leg up and over, let the sweeping foot slide past underneath, return to base in the same breath. It was a response she had practiced specifically precisely because it was in a video she had watched, and her body had it the way you have something when you've done it enough times that it doesn't require thought anymore. She didn't counter, she reset and waited. Garrett stood with his weight slightly forward from the sweep and looked at her. The room was completely quiet now, and then something shifted in his face. Something moved behind his eyes. He was looking at her and seeing something specific, a recognition assembling itself from fragments. The way she'd moved offline on his first push, the pocket she'd found for that kick, the exact angle of her response to the sweep, the particular placement of her feet. He had seen all of it before, in his own reflection. He had a YouTube channel, tutorial videos, technical breakdowns, combinations, and counters, filmed in this very gym with a camera on a tripod. He'd started posting 2 years ago. The channel had grown to 200,000 subscribers. He'd received messages from students across the country who had learned from his videos. He had never imagined one of them was a 10-year-old girl in Southside Chicago. But standing here now watching her, he understood that he was looking at someone who had studied him, who had taken his instruction frame by frame on a cracked screen phone and had given it to her body with the same care and attention that he himself had given to developing it. The offline step, the kick placement, the sweep response, his technique, his mechanics, his work. She had learned from him. She had never met him. He hadn't known she existed until 4 minutes ago. Garrett stood on the mat and the expression on his face changed in a way that was difficult to name quickly, but that everyone in the room could see. It was the expression of a person arriving somewhere unexpected, of someone who had walked into a familiar room and found the furniture rearranged in a way that made it suddenly strange and interesting. He didn't say anything, not yet. He had not yet worked out what to say. What he said eventually quietly, not for the room, just for her, was all right. A pause. Well, let's see what you really know. And the gym, which had thought this was a 30-second entertainment on a slow Saturday morning, settled into something else entirely. The students along the wall shifted their weight. Someone folded their arms. Someone else moved 2 steps closer to the mat. Lorraine stood by the wall with her handbag in both hands and her knuckles white. Coach Briggs stood where he had always been standing and watched the girls' feet. And Ren, in the center of the mat, breathed in through her nose, settled her weight, and looked at the man in front of her with eyes that were not afraid. Not afraid, not angry either. Something else. Something that had been built slowly in the quiet of 11 o'clock at night, in the cleared space of a small living room, one repetition at a time. The look of a person who has already decided somewhere private and prior to this moment that whatever happens next is survivable. That she has already been through the thing you have to get through in order to look at something hard and not look away. Coach Briggs had seen that look once before, in a boy, on a Tuesday, 17 years ago. His eyes moved from Ren's feet to her face and then back to her feet. He stayed where he was. He waited. Because he knew, with the certainty of a man who has been watching people walk through his door for 26 years, that what was about to happen needed to happen without him. The second round began differently. There was no ceremony to it, no announcement, no reset of any kind that a stranger walking in off the street would have identified as a formal beginning. Garrett simply moved, and the space between casual and serious collapsed in a single step. His footwork changed first. Anyone who had watched him train over the years would have noticed it immediately, the shift from the loose conversational movement of a man running a controlled demonstration to something more compact, more deliberate, The weight lower and more forward, the angles sharper. He was not performing anymore. He was working. And there is a difference between those two things that goes all the way down to the bone. Ren saw it. This was the part nobody would talk about afterward when they tried to reconstruct the morning. They talked about what they saw, the kicks, the counters, the moment she swept him. What they did not talk about, because it is difficult to describe and even more difficult to understand if you have not experienced it yourself, was what she did with information. She watched him. Not the way a nervous person watches a threat, the way a student watches a problem they are in the middle of solving. Her eyes moved constantly, tracking his shoulders, his hips, the angle of his lead foot, the tell in his right hand that preceded certain combinations, a slight inward rotation of the wrist, barely visible, that she had cataloged without knowing she had cataloged it, the way you accumulate knowledge in the dark, not aware of it until you need it. She had studied this man for 4 months. He did not know her name until 12 minutes ago. Garrett pressed forward with a jab combination double jab and a cross fast and clean. He was not trying to hurt her. He was trying to establish the geography of her, where her reflexes were, how she moved under genuine pressure, whether what she had shown him in the first few exchanges was a pattern or a fluke. What came back surprised him again. Ren rolled off the first jab, moving her head to the outside, and the second jab went past her ear into empty air. The cross she absorbed on her forearm in a guard position that was not perfect. Her elbow dropped a fraction, and the impact pushed her back a step, but the position held, and the damage was negligible. She recovered her ground and reset without panic. Garrett paused. He genuinely did not know what to do with this. Not because he was outmatched, he was not outmatched, and that was never in question. The question, the one quietly assembling itself in the back of his mind, was about something more fundamental. She knew what she was doing, not partially, not accidentally. She knew what she was doing the way you know something that you have learned from the inside out, from the 10,000 repetition level of knowledge that lives in the body rather than the mind. She had a framework. She had a system. She had internalized the logic of the art well enough to make decisions with it in real time under pressure against an opponent she had never faced before. He pushed harder, a low kick to the lead leg light, but real, designed to disturb her base and force a response. She checked it, bringing her knee up to intercept the kick, absorbing the contact on her shin. Technically correct. The check was a little late, timing she would need to drill with a partner, but the mechanics were right. He threw a right hook controlled at maybe 40% of his actual speed. She slipped it, ducked under and to the outside, coming up on his right flank with a half-second of positional advantage that she did not immediately exploit, defaulting instead to distance and reset. Conservative, careful. She was choosing safety over opportunity consistently, which told him something important about how she understood the risk she was managing. She was not trying to win, she was trying to not lose. That is a different strategy, and it is not the lesser one. There are fighters who have built entire careers on the discipline of not losing while they waited for their opponent to make the mistake that opened the finish. It requires patience. It requires the particular kind of courage that has nothing to do with aggression. It requires the ability to absorb without crumbling, to endure without despair, to hold your position in the storm and trust that the storm has an end. Garrett threw a sequence, jab, jab, body kick, pivot, and on the pivot, he tried a sweeping takedown, driving for her lead leg with the intention of putting her on the mat cleanly. He got her. Her leg went out and she went down, the fall controlled enough on her part to suggest she had practiced falling, which she had. The videos had taught her to tuck and roll, to distribute the impact, to not put her hands down in the panic reflex that breaks wrists. She hit the mat and rolled to her side and was still. The room made a sound. Several people shifted forward. Lorraine was already moving 3 steps toward the mat, her hand out. And then Ren's voice, quiet and very clear. Don't. One word. She said it while still on her side before she had even begun to get up. She said it without drama, without the performance of toughness, without looking to see if anyone had heard. She said it the way you say something to yourself that you also happen to be saying out loud. Lorraine stopped. The room stopped. Ren lay on the mat for 2 seconds, maybe 3. Long enough that the silence had started to become uncomfortable. Long enough that Garrett had opened his mouth, had drawn breath to say something that would have ended the exercise gracefully. She got up. She got up the way she had practiced getting up, because she had known that getting up was going to be necessary and that it was better to practice in advance than to figure it out in the moment. She rolled to her knee. She brought her trailing leg underneath her. She stood. She adjusted her stance. The adjustment was not small. She dropped her base an inch, both knees more bent, the weight further back, and lower, the center of gravity shifted in a way that would make the same sweeping takedown significantly more difficult to land a second time. She had been put on the mat, and in the 2 or 3 seconds she had lain there, she had processed what had happened, and she had made a correction. She looked at Garrett. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. From the wall, Coach Briggs watched. His face gave nothing away. But there was something in the quality of his stillness that the people near him would have recognized as attention of a very high order. The kind of attention that Briggs reserved for things that mattered. He was watching her feet. Her feet in the adjusted stance were right, not just better right. The correction she had made in those 2 or 3 seconds on the mat was the correct correction, the one that addressed the actual mechanical problem, and she had arrived at it through logic rather than instruction, working backward from the effect to the cause in the space of a breath. He had seen that once before. He kept that thought where it was. Garrett moved again, and the pace in the room changed. Not dramatically, there was no single moment you could point to and say, there, that is where it shifted. It was gradual, the way light changes in the late afternoon, incremental and cumulative. But by the time it had happened, everyone in the gym understood that they were not watching the same thing they had been watching 5 minutes ago. He went at her with a mid-speed combination, 4 strikes, and she managed 3 of them, rolling off the first 2, catching the third on her guard in a way that was clumsy but effective. And then the fourth, a front kick that caught her in the sternum, pushed her back 2 steps. She didn't go down. She planted her rear foot, absorbed the push, found her balance. She came back to center. She moved first this time. It was a feint, a small, sharp movement of her lead hand that was not a committed strike designed only to draw a reaction. It was not sophisticated. It was the most basic application of a concept she had seen demonstrated in a video probably 40 times. But she had the timing. The feint moved at the right speed with enough commitment to be believable and enough restraint to recover from, and Garrett's guard shifted not much, half an inch, a reflexive response. In that half inch, she stepped forward and hit him in the ribs with a short, tight side kick. It wasn't powerful. What it was placed tucked between his elbow and his hip, in the exact window that his guard shift had opened, landing on the floating ribs where a kick does its best work. The force was minimal, but the placement was real. The technique was real. She had read a small opening in a high-level opponent, and she had found it accurately in real time. Garrett flinched, not from pain, from recognition. The room erupted, not the polite, uncertain sounds they had been making. This was genuine, the involuntary noise that groups of people make when something breaks through the careful reserve of people who have seen a lot and are not easily impressed. Voices, someone's hands coming together in a single sharp clap. The man nearest the heavy bag said something low to the person next to him, and that person nodded several times. Ren smiled. It was small and quick, and she tried to contain it, but it was there, real and unguarded, the smile of a person who has surprised themselves. She had not expected to be here. She had not expected any of this. 4 months of 11 o'clock practice in a cleared living room had given her the tools. But the tools in the moment are different things, and the moment was bigger than she had calculated. She let herself have it. Just for a second. The smile. Lorraine near the wall let out a breath she had been holding for a very long time. Her grip on the handbag loosened. The woman next to her, a student she didn't know, put a hand briefly on her arm, a stranger's instinctive gesture of shared feeling, and Lorraine did not pull away. It felt for a moment like things might be resolving. That feeling lasted about 14 seconds. Garrett heard the room. He heard it the way a person hears an audience when they have been performing for that audience for years, not consciously, not with the analytical part of the mind, but in the deeper part that tracks the social temperature constantly and automatically. The crowd response had relocated to the small girl who had just found his ribs with a side kick that he had to admit privately and quickly had been exactly right. Something changed in Garrett Howell. He was not angry. What happened was more complicated than anger and more honest about who he was. The competitive instinct, the one that had been asleep all morning because there had been nothing here worth waking it for, came awake. Not with aggression, with commitment. The quiet, focused commitment of a serious athlete in a serious moment. He stopped managing the situation. He started competing. His next combination was different in every way that mattered. The speed was higher, not full speed, but a speed that assumed she was capable and required him to mean it. The footwork was tighter, the angles more precise, the pressure more sustained. He threw a jab-cross-hook combination that he had drilled 10,000 times and that lived in his hands like a language, the kind of combination you throw in the third round of a tournament and fight when you need something real. Ren read the jab. She was already moving on it when the cross came, and the cross was faster than anything she had faced in the first part of the exchange, and it got through. It caught her on the shoulder, not the most dangerous place, but the force behind it was real, and it rotated her, and for a moment her feet were wrong. Her weight was on the wrong side, and the hook was already coming. She did not fall, but she was pushed. Hard and suddenly backward and sideways, the momentum carrying her across the mat in a stumbling diagonal, until her heel hit the edge tape, and she was at the perimeter, the boundary, with nowhere left to retreat, and Garrett 3 steps away and moving forward. The room went quiet. Not the uncertain quiet of before. The absolute quiet of people who have understood all at once that what they are watching has crossed into territory that none of them had predicted when the morning started. Curtis moved. He had been in his corner for the entire exchange, far wall arms folded, watching with the focused stillness of someone paying very close attention for his own reasons. He unfolded his arms and pushed himself away from the wall and took 3 steps toward the mat. His intent plain, he was going to step in, and it create a reasonable exit for everyone. Briggs raised his hand, 1 inch, maybe 2. An elevation so small that it should not have been visible from across the room, and yet it registered immediately the way authority registers when it is genuine and consistent and has been built over years of being exactly what it says it is. Curtis stopped. His foot was already in the air for the 4th step, and he brought it down where it was, and he stopped. Briggs did not look at Curtis. His eyes were on the mat. Let her finish it. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It had the quality of something spoken from the center of a room that is already listening. Curtis stood where he was. He looked at Ren at the perimeter, one heel on the boundary tape, Garrett coming forward. Then he looked at Lorraine, and the expression on her face was something he recognized with a specificity that was almost physical, the face of someone holding on to the last length of rope with both hands and not letting go and not letting it show how much it cost. He recognized that face because he had worn it, not long ago. He turned back to the mat. Ren was at the edge. The perimeter tape was a physical fact, and also in the way that certain moments contain more than one meaning, at the same time something else entirely. Permission. Permission to step off, to call it, to have done enough, come far enough, because she had genuinely already done more than anyone in this room had expected when the morning started, and nobody would have said anything unkind if she had taken that step back. She knew that. She registered it, and she stood with one heel on the tape, and she looked at Garrett 3 steps away, settled and focused. She did not step off. She breathed in. Her weight was wrong, still too high from the stumble, her base not fully recovered. She could feel it, the particular sensation of a body that is slightly out of its own alignment. She had felt this before. Not in practice. In practice, she had rarely been pushed hard enough to feel it. She had felt it in school hallways and on that 4-block walk and in a kitchen at night with her back against the cabinet under the sink, when the thing she was afraid of felt so close and so shapeless that there was no way to face it directly, only to sit with it and wait for morning. She knew this feeling. She did not know how to win from where she was standing, but she knew how to not quit. These are different things. Most people spend their entire lives without learning the difference. Lorraine was standing by the wall, and she was looking at her daughter, and she was thinking about a night in October, 12 weeks before this morning, when her phone had rung at 2 a.m, and the number on the screen was the school nurse's cell, and she had picked up with her heart already in her throat. The voice on the other end had been careful and even, and had said the words panic attack, and had said the word hospital. And Lorraine had been in the car in 4 minutes, driving across a city that was darkened and empty, and so quiet she could hear her own breathing over the engine noise. She had driven past her exit, twice. The 3rd time she took it and found the right door and walked down a hallway under fluorescent light and found her daughter in a room that smelled like antiseptic, sitting up on the examination table, in a hospital gown, smaller than Lorraine had ever seen her, look a pulse oximeter on her finger. Ren had looked at her when she came in the door. The same quality in her eyes, the same steadiness, not asking for rescue, something older and quieter than that. The look that says, I am still here. Lorraine's hand went to her bag. She did not reach inside. She placed her hand on the outside of the bag, the way you put your hand on a door you are not yet ready to open. Inside the bag, in the zipper compartment where she kept the things she needed fast, was a folded set of papers. Hospital paperwork, the discharge documents from that night in October, plus the follow-up assessments, plus the note from the doctor who had sat with Lorraine in a small office at 4 a.m. and explained in the measured language of someone who does this regularly and has not yet lost the ability to be careful with it, what had been happening to her daughter and what might help. She carried these papers with her everywhere now. Not for anyone else, not to show anyone. There was something about having them close that felt necessary. Something about keeping the record of that night within reach, the way you keep a photograph of someone you love in your wallet, not because you need to look at it constantly, but because the knowledge that it's there is its own kind of comfort. She had not shown the papers to Wren. Wren did not know the full measure of what that night had cost her mother. Curtis saw her hand on the bag. He was watching the mat, but also watching Lorraine with the peripheral attention of someone who had a reason to. He watched her hand go to the bag, and something in the gesture registered with him at a level he couldn't immediately name. He had seen paperwork like that before, not someone else's, his own. 2 years ago, in a different kind of bad stretch, he had folded similar pairs and carried them for months because they contained the truth of what had happened, and he was not yet ready to put the truth down somewhere and walk away from it. He eventually had, but he remembered the weight. He looked at Lorraine for a moment. Then he turned back to the mat and stood where Briggs had told him to stand. On the mat, Wren lowered her base. She bent her knees and brought her weight down and found the balance she had lost working back to it through small adjustments that cost her time and left her briefly exposed. It was the right thing to do regardless. You cannot function from a compromised base. The base is everything. She had read that so many times in so many videos that it had become something close to faith. Garrett watched her do this. He had not advanced while she adjusted. Not generosity exactly, but the unconscious courtesy of a serious practitioner who has recognized something genuine in front of him and does not want to disrespect it by exploiting a moment he would not exploit against anyone he respected. He waited. She found her base. She looked at him. He moved. What followed was 2 minutes of genuine exchange, the kind that people who were in that gym on that morning would still be able to describe in detail years later, not because anything cinematic happened, but because of the quality of attention it demanded and received. Garrett was actually working, not performing his combinations tight and real. And Wren was surviving, which in this context was not a small thing, surviving, and occasionally more than surviving, finding pockets, making the correct decision more often than anyone who had walked in that morning would have predicted possible. She got hit, more than once, more than she had been hit before. Her shoulder took a cross that would leave a bruise. A body kick she checked incorrectly got most of its force through. She was at the limit, not past it, but right at the edge, the place where the work you have done either holds or doesn't. The work held, and then she saw it. Garrett reached just slightly on a hook, his weight coming forward a fraction of an inch more than it should have, the lead foot a fraction further than his base could comfortably support. It was a small error, and it lasted less than a second. But Wren had watched this man throw this combination from this angle in this precise configuration 47 times. She had counted in the way that a person counts something they plan to use, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with the cracked phone in front of her and the notebook open beside it. She moved. The sweep was not powerful. It didn't need to be. Power is for breaking things down. Timing is for catching them when they're already falling. The lever you need is leverage, not force, and leverage comes from geometry, from putting your foot in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment and letting physics complete the equation. She got the foot placement right. She got the timing right. And Garrett Howell, 28 years old, 6 feet black belt, preparing for the regional tournament in March, went down. His hand hit the mat first. The trained response, protect the fall, distribute the impact. He rolled with it, controlled, and came back up to one knee before the echo of the sound had finished crossing the room. The technique was good. He was fine. He was on the mat. The room did not make any sound for several seconds. Not the sounds of before, not the murmurs, or the applause, or the small cautious expressions of surprise. Nothing. The gym absorbed what had just happened and held it the way a room holds a note after the music has stopped giving it the space it deserves. Wren stood in the center of the mat. She was breathing hard. Her chest rose and fell quickly, the controlled rhythm of her practice gone, replaced by the honest labor of a body that had been fully extended. Her ponytail had come most of the way down, the hair loose around her face. Her face was flushed. She did not look triumphant. She looked like herself. Exactly like herself, the same serious assessing quality she had brought into the room, only now with the exertion layered over it, the physical evidence of what she had just done, showing in her posture and her breath. She stood and she waited. Garrett rose from his knee. He came to standing and was still for a moment. Then he looked at Wren. He looked at her for a long time. The gym was completely quiet. Nobody moved. The moment had a weight to it that everyone could feel, but that nobody was going to be the first to break. Coach Briggs stood against the far wall. He was not looking at Wren's feet anymore. He was looking at her face. The applause when it came was not immediate. That is the detail worth holding on to. If it had come immediately, if the moment Garrett's hand hit the mat, the room had erupted into the uncomplicated noise of a crowd that has watched something entertaining and is registering its approval, then this would be a different kind of story. Immediate applause is what happens when people are watching a performance. What happened in Crossroads Dojo on that Saturday morning was a pause first, a collective stillness that lasted perhaps 4 seconds, perhaps 5, in which 43 people processed what they had witnessed and understood one by one, and then all at once that it was real. Then it came. Not the polite, tentative sound that had surfaced twice before during the exchange. This was different. This was the sound that comes out of people when they stop deciding how to feel and simply feel it, the involuntary expression of something that has moved through the careful filters of self-consciousness and social calculation and come out the other side as pure and managed response. A man near the heavy bag started it, his hands coming together hard and without hesitation, and the sound spread in a way that sound spreads when the room was already primed for it, like a match finding air. The student who had been quietly filming on his phone from the back corner, he had started recording 17 minutes ago, without quite knowing why, only that something told him to lower the phone for the first time and joined in with the rest of them because some moments are better witnessed than documented, and this was one. Ren stood in the center of the mat and breathed. She did not perform the applause. She did not raise her hands or smile for the room or do any of the things that a person does when they understand a crowd is watching them and wants something back. She simply stood, chest moving, hair loose around her face, and took the air into her lungs and let it out because her body needed oxygen, and that was the most pressing fact in the world right now. Garrett was still looking at her. He had not joined the applause. He was not apart from it. It wasn't that he was unmoved or removed from what was happening in the room. It was that he was in the middle of something, a process taking all of his available attention, an accounting of the kind that you do not do in public if you can help it, and that he was unable to stop. He was thinking about a Tuesday. He was 11 years old and his mother had brought him to a gym on the south side that smelled like rubber and old wood, and she had held his hand the entire drive over in her station wagon with the cracked dashboard. When they walked in, he had been small for his age, wearing jeans that were a little too short and sneakers with a hole starting at the left toe. The gym had been full of people who were bigger than him and older than him and who had been doing this for years, and he had stood at the edge of the mat and felt very clearly and very specifically that he was in the wrong place and that everyone could see it. And then a man had looked at his feet, not at his face, not at his clothes, at his feet. And the man had watched him for 3 seconds and then had walked over and said quietly, not for anyone else, just for him, "You move right. We can work with that." Raymond Briggs, 1993. A Tuesday in March. The gym he had been brought to was this gym. The man who had said those words was standing against the far wall right now, 40 feet away, watching the mat with an expression. Garrett recognized the expression of someone watching something that had engaged the deepest part of their attention. Garrett had thought most of the time over the years that it was him Briggs watched that way, had assumed it the way you assume things when you have been excellent for long enough that excellence starts to feel like identity. He understood now, standing on the mat with the floor still solid under his feet from the fall, that Briggs had been waiting for this morning for longer than any of them had known. The applause ran its course and the room settled into the gentle uncertainty of what comes after. Conversations started up near the walls, low and immediate. The kind of conversations that are really just one person saying to another, "Did you see that?" and the other saying yes, and both of them reaching for words that aren't quite there yet. Garrett moved first. He walked to the edge of the mat and crouched down his back to most of the watching students. He reached behind him and worked the knot of his belt loose with the practice of a man who has done this gesture thousands of times. The belt came free, and he held it in both hands for a moment. It was worn the way things get worn when they are used constantly and seriously over years. The edges were fraying slightly. There was a dark mark near one end from a training session 2 years ago when his knuckles had split. It had been washed, but the ghost of it remained the way certain things leave marks that laundering cannot fully remove. He stood and walked back to the center of the mat. He stopped in front of Ren. She looked up at him. Her breathing had steadied. The steadiness was coming back into her face, that particular quality she carried, the stillness behind the eyes, the thing that had made Briggs look at her feet in the first moment she walked through the door. Garrett crouched down to her level. He did not extend the belt toward her. He did not make a presentation of it, did not frame it as a gift or a ceremony. He placed it on the mat between them, equidistant. belonging to neither of them and to both the way certain things exist between two people in a moment that neither will fully forget. He left it there. He looked at her. She looked at the belt on the mat between them. She looked back at him. The room had gone very quiet again. Lorraine near the wall had both hands pressed flat against each other in front of her mouth. The fingers laced the knuckles touching her lips. The posture of someone who is holding something in very carefully. Ren looked at the belt on the mat between them. She looked at Garrett's face. He was watching her without expression, not blank, but the kind of watchfulness that is not asking anything, that is only present, that will accept whatever comes next without requiring it to be any particular thing. She looked at the belt one more time. She stood up straight. She stepped over it. She walked across the mat toward her mother. Nobody said anything. The gesture was complete in itself, and the room understood this without being told, the way a room understands when a piece of music has resolved, not because it was explained, but because the resolution was felt. She had seen the thing offered, understood what it was, and made her choice about it. The choice was hers. It said something about her that all the applause in the room could not have said as precisely. She reached Lorraine. Lorraine put her arm around her daughter's shoulders and pulled her close. Not for the room, simply the movement of a woman who needed to feel that her daughter was there, close, real, breathing. Ren let herself be held. For a moment, she was just a 10-year-old who had done something very hard and was tired, standing next to her mother, and that was enough. Garrett was still on the mat. He stood and looked at the belt on the floor. He reached down and picked it up. He held it without putting it back on. Then he turned toward the far wall, toward Briggs. He walked across the mat and the room watched him, and when he reached the wall, he stopped in front of his coach with the belt still in his hands and the question already on his face before he had found the words. "Where did she train, coach?" Briggs looked at him. The look had no urgency in it, no drama. It was the look of a man who has been waiting for a question for some time and is now simply receiving it. "She didn't." Garrett stood with that for a moment. "Then how? Same way you did." Briggs's voice was even unhurried, the voice of someone reporting a fact that has always been true and does not require emphasis to be significant. "Before I found you, you were 11, South Side. Your mother brought you in on a Tuesday." Garrett did not respond immediately. Briggs did not fill the silence. He had never been a man who filled silences that were doing necessary work. What moved through Garrett in those seconds was not a single thing. It was several things simultaneously, the way important realizations arrive not in a clean line, but in a flood, multiple recognitions coming together from different directions and arriving at the same place at once. He was thinking about a Tuesday in March in 1993. He was thinking about his mother's hand and the station wagon and the two short jeans. He was thinking about the man who had looked at his feet and said, "We can work with that," and what those 6 words had meant over the 17 years since they were spoken. He was thinking about a 10-year-old girl who had watched his tutorial videos 47 times and had practiced in a living room at 11 o'clock at night for 4 months until she could stand on a mat and hold her ground against a regional-level competitor who outweighed her by more than 100 pounds. He was thinking about the YouTube channel, about the 200,000 people who watched his videos. He had thought he knew who they were. He had imagined a demographic, adults, mostly serious practitioners, looking to refine what they already had. He had not imagined her. He had not imagined her mother, who had carried her to a gym on a Saturday because she had run out of other options, the same way his mother had carried him to this gym on a Tuesday because she had run out of other options. He had not imagined Briggs standing against this wall, recognizing something in a girl's feet that he had recognized once before, and that had been the most important investment of attention he had ever made. Garrett looked at his coach for a long moment. Then he looked down at the belt in his hands. "You knew," he said, "when she walked in." Briggs said nothing, which was in itself an answer. Garrett nodded slowly. He looked across the room toward where Lorraine was standing with her arm around Ren, the two of them quiet, separate from the conversations that had resumed around them in a small private pocket of the morning that was entirely theirs. He put his belt back on. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of Lorraine first. "Your daughter is going to be fine." Not as a prediction and not as a comment on the mat. He said it the way you say something you know to be true, from a place deeper than assessment, from the place that knows certain things about certain people before the evidence is complete. Lorraine looked at him, and her eyes were bright, and she said, "I know," in a voice that was very steady, and he believed her completely. Then he crouched down in front of Ren. The room fell back slightly, the way the world falls back when two people are saying something that belongs only to them. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You've got something that can't be taught," he said. He was finding the right words, which required a moment. "I've been teaching for 6 years. I've worked with a lot of people. What I saw out there, the way you read, the way you adapt, the way you stood back up, that's not technique. Technique, I can give anyone who shows up and works. What you have underneath the technique is something different, something that comes from in here. He touched his sternum once briefly without drama. You know what I mean. She held his gaze without looking away. Yeah, she said. He nodded. I'm starting a program, free training for kids in this neighborhood who can't afford regular sessions. I've been building toward it for a year. He looked at her steadily. I've been looking for the right person to begin it with. Someone whose story makes clear why it needs to exist. Ren said nothing. She was listening. I want that to be you, if you're willing. She considered this for a moment with the same care she brought to everything genuinely the way a person weighs something real. Not yet, she said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. I want to keep going the way I've been going, for a while longer. A pause. Ask me again in a month. He looked at her for another moment. Then he smiled, not the easy practice smile from early in the morning, the one that had started all of this. Something with less performance in it and more honesty. The smile of a man who has just been answered in a way that confirmed what he suspected. A month, he said. I'll hold you to that. He stood. He walked back across the mat and began the work of returning the morning to what it had been before, which was not fully possible, but was the appropriate thing to attempt. The gym returned to itself. The conversations, the drills, the ordinary productive sounds of a Saturday morning. The moment was not forgotten, but it was absorbed the way a room absorbs what happens in it over time, adding it to everything else that has happened in this space across 26 years. Curtis had not moved from where Briggs had told him to stop. He was still standing there when Lorraine and Ren began to gather their things. He watched them, and he understood that they were leaving, and he understood, with a directness that surprised him, that he needed to say something before they did. The window was about 90 seconds. He crossed the gym. He stopped beside them to the side, aware that his presence at this moment was not automatic. Excuse me. Lorraine looked at him. Ren looked at him. I've been training here for 2 years, he said. I've seen a lot of people come through this door. He looked at Ren. I've never seen anything like that. Ren looked at him with her steady, assessing quality. I'm Curtis. I don't usually say much. He paused. He needed a moment to find the rest of it, and he gave himself that moment without apologizing. 2 years ago, I was having a rough stretch. The kind you don't talk about much. Coach Briggs let me train here when I couldn't pay. Didn't make a thing of it. Just let me come in and work. He looked at the floor briefly, then back up. Whatever you're carrying, I don't know what it is, but I recognized something when you walked in this morning. He looked at Lorraine now directly. You don't have to carry it alone. That's all. Lorraine looked at him. Her hand went to her bag, not the unconscious movement from before the gesture of someone reaching for something they were not ready to open. This was deliberate. She opened the zipper compartment and took out the folded papers. She held them for a moment without extending them toward anyone. My daughter was hospitalized in October, she said. Her voice was even and clear. Panic attack. Severe enough that they thought it was cardiac. She spent 4 hours in the emergency room. She paused. I sat outside the room in a chair in the hallway at 2 in the morning, and I held these papers, and I thought, she stopped. Found it again. I thought I had missed something, and that it had been right in front of me the whole time, and I hadn't seen it. Ren was very still. She was looking at the papers in her mother's hand. She had not known Lorraine carried them. She had known about that night she had been there, had lived it, the fluorescent lights, in the hospital gown, in the cold of the examination table. She had known all of that, but she had not known about the chair in the hallway. She had not known about the 2 in the morning and the thought that Lorraine had thought. She looked at her mother's face. Lorraine was not looking at her yet. She was looking at the papers, and then at Curtis, and then at something in the middle distance that contained something only she could see. Then she folded the papers carefully back along their creases and returned them to the zipper compartment and closed it. She looked at Ren. The two of them looked at each other the way people look when they have understood something at the same moment, and the understanding is too large for immediate words, and the words can wait because the understanding itself is already the thing. Ren reached out and took her mother's hand. Lorraine closed her fingers around it. Curtis stepped back. He had said what he came to say. He gave them a nod and returned to his corner and picked up where he had left off, which was exactly the right thing to do. Coach Briggs was in the small office at the back when they passed it on the way out the door, half open, going through some papers with the methodical, unhurried attention of someone who has learned not to rush things that don't need rushing. He looked up when they passed the doorway. He looked at Ren. She looked at him. He said nothing. He gave the same small nod he had given twice before that morning, the nod that encompassed approval and acknowledgement, and something more, the nod of a man who has been paying very close attention and has seen what he expected to see. Wren nodded back. Then they were through the door and out into the winter air. The Chicago cold that had no interest in what had happened inside and required immediate renegotiation. The sky was the same flat gray it had been at 8 in the morning. The street was the same. The tire shop and the juice bar and the check cashing place. The world had not reorganized itself around what had happened to two people inside a converted warehouse on a commercial block on the south side. The world rarely does. They reached the car, got in. Lorraine started the engine and let it warm up, and neither of them said anything while they waited. The heat came on, and the windshield began to clear at the edges, and the city was there through the glass, ordinary and continuous. Lorraine pulled out and drove 2 blocks and stopped at a light. "I didn't know you were training," she said. Not accusatory, reporting, finding the edge of the thing. "I know," Wren said. 4 months. Almost. The light changed. Lorraine pulled forward. The notebook on the shelf. Wren looked at her. "I saw it 3 weeks ago," Lorraine said, "when you were at school. I put it back the way I found it." A pause. "I didn't say anything." "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" Wren looked at the passing city through the window. The question was real and deserved a real answer, and she thought about it honestly for a moment. "I didn't want you to worry about something else," she said. "You already carry enough." Lorraine drove. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have been each other's entire world long enough that the silences between them have their own texture and meaning, another form of conversation that requires less management than the spoken kind. "How long have you known?" Wren asked. Lorraine considered it. "About the training or about how scared I was?" "Both." Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Outside the south side moved past the windows, the blocks that had been one thing for years and were becoming something else, the places that were still holding on against the change. "I've known you were scared for longer than you know," Lorraine said. "You're my daughter. I know when you're carrying something." She paused. "I didn't know about the training until 3 weeks ago. I guessed at some of it, not all of it." She looked briefly at Wren and then back at the road. "What you did in there today, I didn't know that was possible. I should have known. I think I was afraid to ask." Wren looked at her mother for a moment. "You brought me," she said simply. "What? You didn't have to, but you brought me." She turned back to the window. "That's the same thing." Lorraine drove the rest of the way home without speaking because there was nothing that needed to be added, and she knew it, and Wren knew it, and knowing when a thing is complete is its own kind of wisdom. The apartment was warm. Lorraine made soup. They ate at the kitchen table, and when they were finished, Wren helped clear the bowls without being asked. In the afternoon, they watched television. Nothing in particular, the comfortable drift of Saturday programming, and Lorraine fell asleep on the couch somewhere around 4, a deficit she had been running toward for some time. Wren put a blanket over her and moved quietly through the apartment for the rest of the evening, doing her homework at the kitchen table, making a sandwich at 6, leaving the hallway light on, so the apartment would not be dark when Lorraine woke. At 10:30, Lorraine stirred and came back to full wakefulness with the slight disorientation that lasted only a few seconds before she placed herself in time and space and remembered the morning. She sat up and saw Wren at the kitchen table finishing the last page of a math worksheet with the focused economy she brought to everything she did. They talked for a while, not about the gym, about school, about a book Wren had been assigned that she had opinions about whether the radiator in the bedroom needed to be looked at again. The ordinary substance of their life together, which was in its own way the most important substance there was. At 11 o'clock, Wren went to her room. She sat on the bed in the dark for a moment, not thinking about anything specifically, just being in the room and letting the day settle around her the way a day settles when it has been very full. Her shoulder ached where the cross had connected. She pressed on it gently with 2 fingers and noted the pain without particular interest, the way you note something that is real and present and not serious. She reached under the pillow and took out the cracked phone. For a moment, she did not turn it on. She held it in the dark and thought about what she wanted to do with it. She had been coming to this phone at this hour for 4 months with a clear purpose. The videos, the instruction, the deliberate accumulation of knowledge, built in the dark, one repetition at a time. The purpose had been clear and it had produced something. Not the outcome, not the morning, those were byproducts. The thing she had been building was in her body now, in the boson, and the reflex and the calibrated instinct of someone who has done the work from the inside out. She turned the phone on. She opened the camera. She stood from the bed and set the phone on the shelf where it had always lived, propped against the stack of books at the angle that gave the best view of the cleared space in front of the couch. She pressed record. She stood in the low light and ran the sweep. Slowly at half speed, the weight transfer along, the timing of the step, the foot placement, the moment of leverage. She did this several times, then stopped the recording and played it back. She watched herself. She paused at the moment of contact. She looked at her foot position. She looked at her base in the instant before the lever engaged. She saw something, a small thing, a degree of angle in her trailing foot that was not quite right, that would cost her efficiency if left unaddressed. She had not noticed it until she saw it from the outside. She got the pencil. She opened the notebook. 3 words, small and careful in the handwriting she used when she meant to remember something. A note to herself, a debt to pay in the next practice, and the one after that, until the correction became habit, and the habit became reflex, and the reflex belonged to her body, the way all the other things she had built these past 4 months now belonged to it. She set the pencil down. She turned off the phone. She lay down in the dark and looked at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the building settling into its overnight rhythms, the radiator, the street below, the city, doing what it does in the hours when most of it is asleep. Sounds she had heard every night of her life in this apartment. The texture of her particular existence. She was not celebrating. She was not confused about what had happened today. She had been knocked down and pushed to the edge and held on by the narrowest margin of 4 months of 11 o'clock work. She knew the distance between winning and not quitting, and she was clear about which one had occurred. But she also knew this. She had walked into that gym as the same person who had walked home from school alone on a Tuesday in October with her eyes on the pavement. She had walked out someone who had stood in the center of a mat and been exactly who she was in front of 43 people who had not expected her to be anything at all. She had been offered something, and she had looked at it, and she had chosen her own direction. That was not nothing. Tomorrow she would move the coffee table. She would press play. She would find the error in her trailing foot, and she would correct it slowly from the beginning until it was right. And then she would find the next thing that was not right, and she would correct that too. This was the work. It did not end because a Saturday had gone unexpectedly. It did not pause because she was tired or because she had done something today that she had not thought herself capable of. The work continued because that is the nature of work that is chosen rather than assigned. It becomes its own reason. Down the hall, Lorraine slept. In the living room, the coffee table waited. Wren closed her eyes. In the morning, she would begin again.